Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our very special fireside chat with our dear friend Skylar Balar. We are so happy to have him here tonight and to have a very important conversation about his brand new book. Can't wait to hear more about it and why he does the work that he does. He's such an amazing advocate. He's such an amazing proponent. He's just an amazing human, and we are so thrilled to have him join. So we're just gonna hold for him and see if we're gonna get him on. So we'll just hold for a few more moments. But in the meantime, we just want to just share a few updates from our Alliance team. Tomorrow is a very big day for our organization. We are actually turning 21 years old, which we're super excited about. So big announcements on the way last year. But yeah, just really thrilled. Thank you all so much for celebrating 2 decades with us. So I got Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I know that we're just waiting for Melchior, and we'll have them join as soon as we can. So, um,
Perfect.
in the meantime, how are you?
I'm doing well. Bouncing around, always busy, of course, but really excited to chat with you. I know it's been a little while, and we see each other monthly, of course, but a little
For,
different to actually sit down and have a conversation.
for sure. So before we hop in on questions, and I definitely want to make sure that we're able um, get them in. How are you doing? First and foremost.
I'm good. I'm really excited about the book. I've got it here so everybody can see it. I'm just overwhelmed by the publishing process, I think. If anybody, you're an author, so you know, it's always complicated to actually sell the book.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm kind of just like doing my best to talk about it, and I think I want people to read it, but I also don't want to be like, you have to read it. I want to be like, this is like my heart in a book. So I hope you love it, and if you don't, okay. Melchior also just texted me and said that they did send a request. It should be under
Let
ASL
now
English Interpreter, I think.
right now. There we go. Let's see if that.
Perfect.
Yeah, awesome. Sorry about that. I'll definitely apologize to them when they get up.
No
But
worries.
there we go. Hello.
Hey, Melchior.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and for being part of this important conversation. First, Skylar, I know that many folks already know who you are, all the important work that you do. Um, you know, Something that I really appreciate, that several folks do when they interview people, they ask them to introduce themselves, how they want to be introduced, how they want to be seen and heard. So would love to have you just share a little bit about who you are and why you do all the phenomenal things you do.
Sure, thank you. Well, my name is Skylar, for anybody who doesn't know. I use he, him pronouns. I'm 25 years old, and I'm the first transgender athlete to compete for a Division One men's team in college. And that's sort of what's given me this platform to talk about my journey, to talk about my experience, to advocate for trans people. So yeah, that's sort of my claim to fame, if you will. But since competing in college, I went to Harvard and I competed there for 4 years. I graduated I guess, 2.5 years ago now, and I've been working as a DEI consultant, as a speaker. I actually did that all throughout college as well, but it's just become my full-time job. I also do a lot of work within eating disorder mental health spaces, which is why you and I are connected. And I'm currently sitting on the EDC board. The Eating Disorder Coalition board is one of my many sort of consulting gigs, if you will. And I am now a new author, so this is my book, Obie is Man Enough, and it's about a trans athlete, a trans kid. So that's another sort of part of my advocacy work, and specifically for children. It's a middle grade novel, so it's 10 and up. And then I do a bunch of other various things, but those are sort of the headline ones, if you will.
So my first question is, do you sleep? Just with everything you do, and I, as you shared, as someone that is an author who did publish a book, I know how tedious and arduous that process is, and you put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. And you know, I know that for me, having the privilege of being able to publish a book and get my story, my words out there was extremely humbling. And it was, it definitely reminded me that two things can exist at one time. It can be very exciting and very scary at the same time. So more than anything, huge congrats on the book. It's extraordinary. I've actually seen people just that really needed to use words. So do you mind sharing with individuals that are tuning in the general premise of the book?
Sure. So it's about Obie, and if you didn't guess, this is Obie. Obie is a 13-year-old Korean American swimmer. He's in middle school. He's in seventh grade. He's kind of just chugging along, figuring himself out. He loves sandwiches and pickles. He has a younger brother, or sorry, older brother. He is a younger brother. He's got his parents who are supportive of him, but he's got some transphobia that he deals with along the way as well. I wanted his transness to not be a centerpiece in the story, although it is very important in it. But it's not all that he is. So he's so much more than just a transgender kid. The arc of the story is that it's a coming of age story. He's figuring himself out. In the beginning parts of the story, he's competing in swimming and he wants to make it to the Junior Olympics. And will he? And how will he do if he does? That's sort of the arc. It's an athlete story in that way, but it's also so much more than just that. So I hope that's what you were asking for as like a horizons of it.
Yeah, with that, really interesting. Why did you choose to write a fiction book as opposed to a personal memoir? Because I'm guessing that so much of yourself is seen in Obie. So what was the deciding factor between writing a memoir and creating this beautiful piece of fiction, for example?
Sure. Yeah, so I think a lot of people ask me about that, and everybody, when I said I was writing a book, they're like, "Great, I'm so excited to read your memoir." I did not write a memoir, and the reason is actually quite simple. I'm not ready to write a memoir. I'm 25 years old, and I feel like I have so much more life to live before I write a memoir. So many more things to live, to write about that are just not ready. Actually, the first time I went out to get somebody like a publisher to buy, a book proposal, it was actually for a memoir. And I got some advice this was back in college, actually, when I was a sophomore. And people said, Skylar, this could be great, but it will be better later. And
Oh,
I think they're right. So the memoir is coming. Just I have no intention of writing it anytime soon. We'll see. But there's another reason. So that's the simplest reason, and that's the actual reason when I started writing was because I wasn't ready for that, and I wanted to write something. Which brings me to the other reason, sort of the primary reason this is a book, and that's because children need to read these stories. And gender identity solidifies around the ages of 3 to 5 years old. So as soon as a kid is in school, they can know who they are. Does that mean that every single one of us will? No, of course not, but they can. And what helps them? Language, stories, availability of people who are in different identities and bodies than maybe are presented by mainstream media. So my goal was to add this story as young as possible, minus being a picture book, because I can't draw. Is that really want to provide that for kids. I want them to have the availability of a story of somebody who doesn't fit maybe what everybody else says is normal, but that's okay. I know that this is the story that would have changed my life as a kid. I did not know that I was allowed to be anybody but what I was assigned at birth. I did not know the language for describing how I felt, why I was so uncomfortable in my body, why I didn't, fit in with other girls, but why boyhood was also scary at the time because I was like, I don't know how to claim that, right? And if I had read a story like this, gosh, that could have really changed my life. So it's for all those kids that don't get to see themselves in books and in the media and stories and movies with the hope that maybe they can see themselves in a piece of Obie.
that is so beautiful. I actually got a question in yesterday when we posted that we were having this conversation. It was from a parent of a young child who wants to do everything they can to make their child an ally and to give their child that opportunity to be who they're destined to be and are. What would you say to that parent? The child is actually 6 years old, just to give you an idea, and
Sure.
just one of really amazing humans.
I think, first of all, I think you're already on the right path if that's what your goal is, right? I think that if you're already thinking to yourself, gosh, how can I make the best, the best of parenting my kid and make sure my kid can be the best kid that they can be, A plus already, right? I actually just listened to a podcast recently that said you actually can't make your kids smarter, but you can make them dumber, which was really fascinating. But it's basically like all you can do is open up them to be the best that they can be, but you can't, and you can make them worse by not allowing them that space, right? By not cultivating the best in them. So that might not sound as relevant as maybe you might think it is, but it is really relevant because what my point is like, let them blossom. Kids will be, I think, really wonderful people if we let them. And I think this world has a lot of ways that we tell kids no. No, don't be yourself. No, don't do it that way. No, you can't do art. No, you can't play with that toy or that person in that way. And there's social rules and really important things about appropriateness that we need to teach kids. But I'm talking about identity. I'm talking about how we walk through the world as who we are in who we are. And I think parents have this idea that they need to like package it up in the perfect little thing, put a bow on top, and that's not the case. You just need to let your kid grow. And I think sort of aside from that, the actual logistical things you can do, give them stories like Obie's. I don't care if they're transgender or not. Give them stories about kids that don't look like them because they will build that empathy. Kids are built on connection. That's how their brains work. I come from a cognitive neuroscience background. Developmentally, a child is looking to connect, period. And if you give them the tools and the resources and the stories to do so, they will.
I love that reminder of giving your child space to ultimately be who they were always destined to be. I think that it's pretty incredible. Now being a parent myself, is watching my child do the things that she's going to do, and I very purposely tried to remove any type of gender norms from her child rearing process. And it's really amazing to watch who she is, and who she's becoming, and realizing, and something that I tell her all the time is, who you are today is not who you're going to be tomorrow, and thank goodness, and that you're always growing and you're always evolving. So I really appreciate that feedback. Would love to know if you could do a column of like, this is Skylar, this is Obie. What characteristics do you feel most akin to with Obie, and what are the most things that are different than Obie?
Yeah, so everybody like they look at this book and they're like, okay, Korean American transgender swimmer, it's you, Skylar. You just like made up a story about yourself, right? Um, I have a couple thoughts about that. One, if there were lots of Korean American transgender people in the media, you wouldn't think that. You would just, think that it's just that. So that's a fault of representation. It's an availability bias, right? One. Two, Obi is very similar to me. So in all sincerity, it is obviously part of my life in that I wrote Obi. He is also a fictional character. There are many things he goes through, most of the things he goes through, that I didn't go through because they're different parts of life, right? I came out at 18 and 19, and I transitioned right before college. Obi comes out when he's 10 and transitions before like seventh grade, sixth grade. So very different life developmental things. And I wrote Obi as sort of an ode to perhaps the boyhood that I never had, what it would have maybe looked like, of course, fictionalized, but what it could have looked like if I had come out then, if I'd had the resources, if I'd had the, courage and the language to describe myself. So in that way, I think there's a similarity, but it's almost fantasy based, if that makes sense. But a couple column notes. So we're both Korean American. I switched the parents. So my mom is Korean, my dad is white. Obi's dad is Korean, Obi's mom is white. The age is very different. Obie has an older brother. I have a younger brother. Obie's brother is very supportive of him. That is something that I sort of wrote in hopefulness, I think. My brother is somebody I adore and somebody I love deeply, but we have our differences. So I think there's a bit of perhaps healing and grief in writing Obie's brother, Jaesung. What else? Obie's friends are kind of the people, especially people who are on his team, are kind of every teammate that I've ever had that's loved me and really supported me, kind of poured into a couple people. They're not any specific people, but I would also say that those were also really healing for me to write. Obie, like I said, is 13, and his teammates love him unconditionally, and they don't care about his transness. They're just kind of there, right? Especially Mikey and Pooch, who are two of his best friends throughout the story. And I won't give away anything about what they do, but they're very supportive support of Obie, but they don't talk about his transness a whole lot. They're not like, okay, we support your transness. They're just boys, right? And that was really, I was actually crying right before the book came out. I had a session with my therapist, and I started crying, and she was like, what are you feeling? Like, what was, healing about this book to you? And I said, Mikey and Pooch. Because I think as a kid, I never had friends that were just friends. They were just people who were with me through the same thing. I was very alone as a kid. I never really had friends with like a bunch of girls because I wasn't considered girl enough. I was too boyish, and the boys knew that I was, quote, supposed to be a girl, so I wasn't allowed to play with them either. I got really stuck. And that was really hard. I didn't have people who I got to just be a boy with. And I kind of got a bit of that in college, but it's just not the same. So
Yeah.
I think those are really healing parts to write for Obie as well, and that I hope can show other trans people and cis people that those friendships are possible, right? I hope as you read it and you read Obie, if you're, somebody's looking how to be an ally, you can read it and be like, oh my God, I want Obie to have these friendships. Obie deserves these friendships. And then you can extrapolate, oh, so do all other trans kids. And if you're on the flip side of that too, you can read and say, hey, I deserve friendships like Obie does, right? I am a trans kid and I know I deserve those. So let me seek those out.
I think that is so, so beautiful. And I think something that has been extraordinary and what I've really learned from you. So thank you for that. And just from really taking the time and the space to really learn and to listen, um, is how to be an ally, is how to show up, is to how to create opportunities for, for people to be seen and heard as they are and who they were always destined to be. And I got that same feeling too as I read the book of like advocating and knowing how I wanted to show up, how I wanted them to show up for Obie, and how I hope I show up for my friends who are trans and how I continue to just be in their corner and support them, and also to be willing to ask the questions and to ask how I could be the best support, and also knowing that it is not my friends' jobs that are trans to constantly be teaching me either. So by very much asking the questions when I'm able to ask, and then also taking a step back and acknowledging all the work that goes in, and how it's not someone's job to teach me all the time. So I really appreciate that, and that's something that I know I've learned from you, and I'm lucky enough to have my community around me as well. Something that I found actually really interesting is that you didn't shy away in the book about bullying and violence. Why was it important for you to include that? Why did you make sure that it was part of the book?
Totally. So that was really a difficult decision to make, right? So as I was trying to figure out, do I even include this violence? Do I include the transphobia in the sort of nastiest way that it can come out? I struggled because I knew that trans kids would read the book, right? And I hoped for, to God that they would. And there are some traumatic scenes that Obie experiences that are really difficult for him, and that could be really difficult for a trans person, regardless of what their experience is, but especially a trans person who's experienced similar things. It could be really hard to read. And so what I did a couple things. One, I put a disclaimer at the beginning that says, hey, please know that Obie does experience transphobia, that it's not a representative picture of everybody's transphobia, or that everybody can experience, but it is real for some, right? This does happen to some people. So if you're also transgender, please take care of yourself as you read. So I did put that as a disclaimer. It's almost verbatim from what I just said. Of course, that can't always, protect you from everything. And I know that it's a risk. So I decided to include it for one really specific reason, which is that it is real. There
Mm-hmm.
are people that experience the things that happen to Obie, and far too many people who experience the things that happen to Obie. And my hope is that if you're not transgender, right? If you're transgender, you know that, and you're fighting for the community, I'm assuming. But if you're not transgender and you read Obie, the book is designed so that you root for Obie. The
Mm-hmm.
whole time you're like, gosh, I want him to win. Gosh, I don't want him to experience that. Why is this person being mean to him? Why did that person say that transphobic thing to him? You root for him throughout the story. And hopefully, as you do, you realize that he doesn't deserve any of the violence and transphobia that he experiences. And so don't all other trans kids, right? So my hope is that you read it and you extrapolate, oh, I support Obie. I want him to succeed. I want him to thrive. Therefore, so should other trans kids. And so that's why I included it, because it's real, and I want us to realize that it's wrong.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for putting that in there. Thank you for putting the disclaimer at the beginning. Thank you for letting folks that may not have experience that be aware. I think that so often we don't do the extra work to find out everything that marginalized communities are going through, are experiencing. And so I love that the way that you put it out there was very digestible, in the fact that um, you start, I think at 10 years of age is where you started, which is tremendous. um, and what I just want to say, it was such a beautiful, easy read. It just flowed so beautifully, and I just want to say again what a it was, and just how the arc played out, and mostly just about how it's just gorgeous story of someone really leaning into and becoming who they are. So thank you so much for that. So I would like to just sort of switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about advocacy. You are a tremendous advocate. Just being an acquaintance of yours and being a huge supporter of yours, like I'm always seeing, you spoke at the march a few weeks ago, and you're always bringing up topics. What do you think has made you the advocate that you are? What about advocacy makes you tick and makes you want to use your voice?
That's a really good question. Well, first, thanks so much for all the kind words about the book being an easy read. I appreciate that. And I worked hard to make it that way, so I'm glad it landed, or at least one person thinks it landed. Um, what about advocacy makes me tick? I think the ability to connect with other people. And that sounds maybe monolithic perhaps, but I think that the more I've done this work, the more I've recognized the power of connection and the power of being able to just be a human with another human. And I think that this world, not I think, I know that this world is divided massively so across many different lines: race, gender, gender expression, religion, class, financial access, etc. I can go on. Mental health, ability. And the problem to me, I mean, aside from it all being rooted in white supremacy and the patriarchy, but the problem in like person to person interactions is not necessarily the system anymore, but the feeling of disconnection. The fact that people think that they can't connect with somebody who is of a different background, whatever that background may be. The fact that that feeling of disconnection is scary. A lot of people are frightened by disconnection. And I don't believe everybody who is homophobic or transphobic is truly afraid, but I do think those words have truth in that usually it is based in some kind of fear or insecurity about oneself. Not actually about queerness. Homophobic people aren't actually afraid of gay people. It's that they are afraid of something within themselves. And I think that what I've found to be so powerful about advocacy is that I can sit down and really connect with another person, and they can see that I'm a real person, right? They could read Obie as a real person. Then maybe they'll let me in a little bit more. And that's all I need. We just need a little bit in, right? In the same way that maybe I then can also see that this person who I thought was just a bigoted a-hole, maybe I can see some humanity in them. Maybe we played the same sport. Maybe they, grew up in the same town. Maybe they, they have a mother they care about in a similar way that I care about my mom. We can see that we're real humans together, and then that's when the change happens. That's when they realize, oh my God, I don't want you to be discriminated against, Skylar. I want to fight for you. And I said, oh my God, I don't want to write you out of my book because you fall into XYZ category. I want you to understand me, and I want to understand you. So I think we lose that. And I think the globalization of the world, and this is like different kind of systemic change, but the globalization of the world has made it really difficult to access humanity and made it really difficult to access that kind of connection. And that's what advocacy to me is about: having people see that connection and that humanity.
So beautifully said. Thank you for that response. I do want to ask you a question more about eating disorder recovery. As for sure, the Alliance, that's what we do here. We raise awareness, provide access to care, free therapist-led support groups, referrals to all levels of care, and educating our frontline responders, doctors, nurses, dentists, on how to recognize and refer eating disorders, and to really smash those archaic stereotypes that are often very hurtful and harmful. So that's what we do here. And as another question that I got yesterday is, what would you say to someone who's currently experiencing an eating disorder and is so damn afraid, that's what their words, to take that next step? What would you say to them?
So the reason I'm smiling is because I've answered lots of these questions
Yeah.
before, right? And I would have the same questions back in the beginning of my recovery as well. And I have a couple thoughts, a couple sort of tools, mantras that I always provide
Mm.
people. The first is that am I allowed to curse, or
Of
should
course.
I? Should I? Okay, well, I'm going to curse then. If you don't want to hear cursing, cover your ears. Uh, so the first thing is that a lot of people, I think, when they approach recovery, think that it has to be a specific way, and they're like, I have to know how this is going to go, everything, and they, they've got their sort of way of being. Let's call it the eating disorder for this thing. You've been eating disorder or engaged with eating disorder for this amount of time. You know how to do that. There's a friend of mine at treatment told me this once, and she said, you know what? I was saying, fuck it, let me just live with my eating disorder. Fuck it, let me just do this. And fuck it, let me, I give up, whatever. I'll just live with my eating disorder forever. And then she said, but then I thought, you know what? What if I fuck it the other way? Fuck it, I know how to do this. Let me try the new thing.
Yeah.
Fuck it, let me try therapy. Let me try this, right? And so the cursing is not really the point. But the point is that I think it's what do you have to lose is really my question for myself. And what do you have to lose the answer is usually comfort in misery.
Mm.
And I encourage people dare to lose that, right? Because you can always go back to it. The eating disorder, in a beautifully horrific way, will always be there if you want it to be. So you can go back to it, except maybe you can take that risk to take a step away from it, and you can always turn back. And for me, that was actually a really important way just to take a step forward, because it said, hey, I can go back over there. There's nothing that's going to stop me, but let me try taking these steps forward. And chances are, the more steps you take forward, the less you're going to want to go backwards.
Mm.
So that's the first tool that I always share. And the other thing is that, and this is, I think, not everybody wants to, loves this thought, but bear with me because I think it's important. You don't have to believe in recovery to recover.
Mhm.
And I think there's like this belief system that I saw around me in the beginning of recovery that was like, no, you have to believe recovery is possible. Recovery is possible. And I was like, I don't see it. I don't
Yeah.
see it. So do I just stay here? Do I just never, see the light or whatever? And what do I do, especially as a trans person, especially as a person of color, especially as an athlete? Like so many intersections for me during eating recovery, I didn't see other people like me who were recovering. So did recovery feel possible? Absolutely not. And take the steps anyways. And
Mhm.
so my thinking is that you don't have to see the end of the tunnel to start taking the steps. You don't have to believe in the ending to take a step. And that's sort of the faith in maybe me, right? You can hear me saying, hey, I promise you can get there. Maybe it's faith in the unknown. Maybe there is no faith, and maybe you just take blind steps. But whatever it is, I think it's about the steps and not about the recovery, because the recovery, you'll get there. But you might not be able to see it at first, and that's okay.
I love that. And one of the things I share all the time in our support groups is that, you know, you don't have to want to do something to do it. And I think that so often our fear is the biggest hurdle. And the other thing that I always share is that, you don't recover to utopia, you recover to life. And life isn't, sunshine, bunnies, and rainbows all day, every day. We have this amazing transhuman that comes to our support groups, and they say all the time, yeah, there may not be sunshine, bunnies, and rainbows all the time, but sometimes there's a damn waterfall, and you have to look for those days. And it's just such a beautiful reminder that recovery is scary. It just it really is scary, because you're, in a sense, for many of us, we're redefining, or stepping out of that maladaptive coping skill that there that really was our life support for a very long time, and we can't even envision life without it. And so the reason why I bring all this up is I think you are such an amazing pillar reminder for us that it's worth taking a step outside of our comfort, stepping into fear, because we have no idea what's waiting for us on the other side. And as someone who really is very comfortable having this elusive idea of control and thinking I know every step that's coming up, the most beautiful things have happened in the most of times. And so I really appreciated the fact that, you don't have to fully believe in it to do it. Even just being okay with just one step. That's all we're asking, is one. So I really love that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you. And I think for me, that was how I got through it. It was just step by step. And the other thing I want to add, and this has been something actually I've thought of more recently in some, processing that I've been doing in therapy, even years after, my recovery, which is that you can also grieve what your eating disorder had for you, right? And I think that's something you touched on just a bit. Eating disorders can be, in a really sort of backwards way, life support for a lot of people. They can be people's best friend. They can be people's, only comfort. They can be the thing that actually keeps people alive, even when it's killing you. So there's something so like meaningful about that. And I guess what I want to say in kind of in addition to what you said about you don't have to want to do something to do it is you don't actually have to feel like it's a good idea either, right? It might not feel like a good idea. In fact, it probably doesn't, because if it's the only thing that's kept you going for years, of course it feels horrible to let it go. Of course you're going to grieve it. And I think there's a lot of shame people have about grieving their eating disorders, I included, by the way, right? Like I think I had a lot of shame, and sometimes I still do, and it's something I have to work through about what it meant that I struggled with that, and what it meant that I held on to it when I did. And I think learning to grieve it and grieve my engagement in those behaviors and what it brought me, I think has been a way to also move forwards. And I guess the reason I'm putting this into your recovery question
Mhm.
is because I don't want people to see that as a barrier, right, to recovery. I think a lot of times people will use that and say, well, I like my eating disorder, so I shouldn't recover. No, right? You can like it and grieve it as you move through recovery.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I also want to hold space for folks that are joining us in this conversation that don't have access. That's a very real thing. That's what brings, both of us to the table, to that EDC table specifically. I know that that's why I wake up every morning and do the work that I do. There's a lot of folks out there that have this misconception that because of their perceived privilege that I have, I did have access to care, and I never did have access to care. I found a lot of my recovery in AA rooms because I couldn't afford, therapy and treatment and higher levels of care. And that is a mountain that I'm very passionate about, because we know that a little bit less than 1/3 of all folks that will experience an eating disorder will actually get access to care, and things need to change, because at the root of it is access to care cannot be a luxury. It is a necessity. So if you are watching this and if you do not have access to care, please know that you're seen, that you're heard, that folks like Skylar and I are doing everything that we can to help, that we all have an amazing voice. Like you touched so beautifully about the power of advocacy, the power of using your voice. Know that that is something that's really important to the both of us. Definitely something that's extremely important to us here at the Alliance, and that we'll continue to do whatever we can so that all folks that need access to care will absolutely get access to care.
Yeah, I really appreciate you highlighting that, Joanna. Like, I think I had so much privilege in having access to care, but so many people don't have that, and in so many different ways, right? I had privilege of access to residential care, to therapy. I had parents who supported that and who also knew where to even send me. So many parents don't even know that the first thing about that because they're not taught. And there's so many, socioeconomic, racial, cultural, gender based discriminatory practices and systems of oppression in the world that don't allow us access to the things that we know can save our lives and that are there, but just we don't have access to. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And I know that's the reason that you do your work, and that, all the Alliance's support groups are free. That's the reason that my support groups are free. They are not eating disorder focused, but they are there. People talk about eating disorder all the time. So, I think what you're saying is so important. And I think it's something that's why, the work that we do is so important, and why we need so many more people to join us in that work, especially people who are from these marginalized backgrounds, because despite the fact that I'm, a Korean American transgender person of color who's an athlete, like that's only one thing. There's so many other people, so many other bodies that aren't represented. And I mean, literally bodies, different bodies of different backgrounds, of different abilities, of different socioeconomic backgrounds, all these kinds of things that we need to be involved in the fight with us so that we can accurately represent and fight for people from all backgrounds who struggle with mental health and with eating disorders.
So, so true. Thank you for highlighting that. So that, our goal here is to pass my voices, because, I absolutely fit my privilege, how I show up, and I'm one, like what you said, I'm one voice. and I'm not. I I will do everything in my power to empower other folks and give them the opportunity to use their voices so that everyone can be represented, so everyone can get access, so everyone can live the lives that they were so destined to live. So I just thank you for that. And the last thing I wanted to ask you before we'll talk about all things the groups, which are phenomenal, and everything that you provide. Um, what is your hope that people take away from your book? Because I do want to bring it back to your book. What's one or two top things that you want readers to take away?
Yeah, mainly I want people to read it and I want them to root for Obie. And as they do, I want them to extrapolate that to other people that they might not have previously rooted for. I hope you read Obie and I hope you say, gosh, I really want Obie to thrive and to succeed. I want him to win. I want him to, kiss the girl and I want him to, he goes on a date. I want him to, have good friends. I want him to be able to, be above the transphobia and all that kind of stuff, right? You want him to succeed as you read. And I think if you can do that, then you can think about that in your life too. You can see all the other Obies. Maybe they're not even trans. Maybe they are kids that are disabled. Maybe that they are kids from a religion that you don't understand. Maybe they just look different from you, whatever it is. Maybe they're Black, maybe they're Indigenous. I want you to read Obie and think about all the kids that you didn't understand before. And maybe kids can extrapolate to adults too and think, gosh, I should root for them as well. And I'm hoping that it can help add to that fire of social justice and human rights that we're in right now. Right? It's an oddly poignant book right now, specifically given the amount of anti-transgender legislation we've seen, surrounding the country, specifically attacking trans kids in sports and trans kids in healthcare, of which Obie is part of both. Obie is a trans kid who receives gender-affirming, life-saving healthcare. He also is somebody who competes in sports, as I've said, both of which he wouldn't be allowed to do in a place like Arkansas or Texas. Given, literally they're sitting today on HB 25 in Texas. So I didn't plan for that. Unfortunately, that kind of happened. But that's all the more important, I think, right now for people to read Obie and say, wait, hold on. Obie deserves to do all these things. So let me vote against those bills. Let me, vote for people who are going to protect trans kids in sports. And let me extrapolate that to any kid who's marginalized for any reason so that we can really fight for human rights together.
I love that. That this is a beautiful segue into information about you and what you do. Unfortunately, I live in Florida. I just sort of put that out there because it's definitely an interesting state. On the second day of Pride, our governor signed really horrific legislation. For Pride, he removed funding from the Pulse community. So we know, and I really thank you for all of the amazing, at that point, swipe ups, but like click links, very simple 20-second, 30-second acts that people can take. So with that being said, how can people get involved? How can people know about the support groups? Tell me all of those things for folks that are joining us from the Alliance handle that might be new to your community.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that I do is I often give people petitions to sign. You might not think petitions make a massive difference, but they can, because it's a voice. It's a collection of voices saying, hey, we believe in this thing. So if you follow me, and if you don't, you should, you can follow me and you can click those links. It literally takes, like Joanna said, 20, 30 seconds to sign. You put your name, move on, and that's it. And I always will push, petitions that I think are really valuable and relevant. And I usually tell you why. So you're not just signing something you don't know. So that's one of the things that you can do as an allyship tool. If you're looking for other resources like my support groups, all of those can be found on my website, pinkmanta.com/support. And I'm just going to put it down here in the chat. This is always where you can find my support groups and my workshops. I also run workshops about once a month. I have different workshops. So last week I did one on coming out, no, that was this week. I did one on coming out. Next week or 2 weeks from now, I have one on masculinity. And that will be focused from a sort of trans masculine perspective myself, but just talking about masculinity in general. Anybody's welcome. And then in a couple weeks after that, during Trans Awareness Week, I'm doing what I think is just going to be an incredible workshop with my friend Caden Coleman, who is a Black trans man. And we're going to talk about intersectionality. So that's going to be just a super cool conversation. That one is not free, but there are scholarships available, so you can apply. But everything else I do is free.
Amazing.
Unless it is taught by a person who's teaching anti-racism, specifically about anti-Blackness. Those are never free because Black people should be paid for that. So that's why Caden's workshop is not free. But the work that I do when I try to just provide is donation-based. And so it's free if you can't pay. The groups I have are LGBTQ+, trans masculine specifically, and there's 2 different meetings for that one. And then I have trans masculine POC. So yeah, I have lots of different support groups. I'm working on one for minors, but that's a struggle legally, as I'm sure you know, Joanna. And then maybe we'll have one for trans ED specific, which would be awesome, and we can talk more about that offline.
Absolutely. I would sign us up for that. But yeah, and back off of that, for those of you who are new to the Alliance community, we offer 5 free weekly clinician-led support groups. Very thrilled to share that since January 1 of this year, we've had more than 15,000 people join our groups, which has been incredible, and thrilled to just offer a space that's really beautiful, inclusive, comprehensive, and safe with clinicians. We also here in our South Florida location, we offer very low cost outpatient care to folks that are underinsured and uninsured, very much on the principle that, you know, that treatment is a necessity and not a luxury. And we will treat individuals as long as they need, as often as they need. We also do referrals to all levels of care from clinicians, dietitians, and therapists, all the way up to acute medical stabilization. Like I said earlier, we do a lot of educating our frontline responders, doctors, nurses, dentists, on how to recognize and refer. All to just say that, you know, we are here to support you and to walk alongside you, as very much, Skylar, you do for so many folks out there. Again, I will not say enough about the book. Please go out, please buy it, please get several copies of it, give them to people. If you have I have one for my nugget, definitely a little, not yet, but will definitely be part of her arsenal of books. But more than anything, Skylar, really thank you so much for just being the light you are. And I really want to thank your amazing ASL translator, Melchior, for being here today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for allowing us to have this. What a gift. Thank you for that. But more than anything, thank you all for joining us. Skylar, thank you for this moment in time. Please take care of yourself. Please stay safe, and I look forward to having many more offline conversations so we can get that trans ED support group off the ground. But in the meantime, thanks again. We'll see you all soon. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks so much, Joanna. Thanks, Melchior.